The blood on the letter wasn't dry. It trembled in Hannah Parker's hands, a single damning smear of crimson against the crisp paper. In front of her, the world was ash. The general store, her home, her entire life, just a smoldering skeleton against the cold Colorado sky of 1878. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was 24 years old, a widow, and now a suspect. The whispers in Whitrock had started before the last ember died. They said her husband, Jacob, had found out about the affair, that he'd set the fire himself, unable to live with the shame. It was a lie, a vicious, hateful lie. But the truth didn't seem to matter much anymore. That morning, the bank manager, Mr. Williams, couldn't even look her in the eye. "I'm afraid we must foreclose, Mrs. Parker," he'd said, his voice as cold as the coins he counted. "Given the circumstances." Everyone in town looked at her that way now, with suspicion, with pity that felt more like poison. Jacob was dead. He'd died in that fire, and he'd left her with nothing but debts, scandal, and this one cryptic, blood-stained letter. As dusk fell, Hannah made her choice. She wasn't going to stay and let them bury her, too. She packed a small carpet bag, a few clothes, her wedding band, which felt impossibly heavy, and the letter. She tucked it deep inside, a secret she didn't yet understand. Then she slipped out of town, a ghost leaving a graveyard. 3 miles outside Whitrock was the old Caldwell Ranch. It was supposed to be empty for the winter. She knew the place, had helped Mrs. Caldwell with canning last fall. The barn would be shelter, a place to breathe, a place to think. The road was dark. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through her. The silhouette of the barn against the sea of stars was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She slipped inside, the familiar smell of hay and earth, a strange comfort. A ladder led up to the loft. With shaking legs, she climbed into the darkness above. It was warm, dry. She burrowed into a corner, pulling her thin shawl around her shoulders. She would sleep, just for a few hours. In the morning, she'd figure out the rest. Maybe Denver, somewhere no one knew her name. Exhaustion pulled her under into a restless, dreamless black. She had no idea she was not alone. Owen Tucker saw the flicker of movement by the barn as he rode up. He wasn't supposed to be here for another week. He just bought the ranch from Old Man Caldwell, a lifetime of savings poured into this one piece of land, his own place, finally. But a feeling in his gut had told him to come early. Now he knew why. Drifters were common, thieves even more so. His hand went to the revolver at his hip, the cold steel a familiar weight. He dismounted, tying his horse in a stand of pines where it wouldn't be seen. He moved toward the barn like a predator, silent on the balls of his feet. The ground floor was empty. Nothing seemed out of place. He was about to turn and leave, to write it off as a trick of the light. Then he heard it. A soft sigh from directly above him. In the loft. He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer echoing in the silent barn. He took the ladder rungs one by one, making no sound. He peered over the edge of the loft floor, and his blood ran cold. It wasn't a drifter. It was a woman, curled in the hay, her face stained with tears and dirt, clutching a small bag to her chest like a shield. He knew her instantly. Hannah Parker. News traveled like lightning in these parts. He'd heard the story in the next town over. The fire, the dead husband, the whispers of infidelity and suicide. But seeing her here, so broken and alone, something was wrong. This wasn't the face of a murderer or a cheating wife. This was the face of a hunted animal. He holstered his weapon. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Parker. Her eyes flew open. Terror flashed across her face, raw and pure. She scrambled backward, pushing herself deeper into the hay. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I didn't take anything. I just needed a place to sleep." Owen raised his hands, palms open. It's all right, ma'am. I mean, you no harm." He kept his voice low and steady. "My name is Owen Tucker. I've just purchased this ranch from Mr. Caldwell." Her panic subsided, replaced by a flicker of recognition. She'd seen him in the store once or twice. A quiet man who kept to himself, tall, broad, with eyes that seemed to see more than most. "Mr. Tucker," she said, her voice trembling, "I apologize for trespassing. I'll leave right now." She tried to stand, to gather her things, but she was shivering, the night's chill seeping deep into her bones. "No need for that," Owen said. "It's the middle of the night. It's not safe out there for a woman alone." Her chin lifted, a spark of defiance in her exhausted eyes. "I have no choice. I can't go back to Whitrock." Owen nodded slowly. He understood more than she knew. He understood the cruelty of small towns. He understood being judged by whispers and lies. "You can have my bed," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them. "I'll take the spare room, at least until morning." Hannah stared at him. She searched his face for a trick, for some hidden motive, some cruel joke. But all she saw was concern. Genuine, steady concern. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me? You must have heard the stories." A strange look passed over his face, a shadow she couldn't quite read. "I've learned not to put much stock in gossip, Mrs. Parker," he said. His voice was even, but there was a hard edge to it now. "And I know what it's like to need a safe place when the world has turned its back on you." He gestured toward the ladder. "The house is warm. I've got food." She hesitated for a long moment. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to trust no one. But where would she go? Back into the darkness? Back toward the town that wanted to see her hang? She looked at this stranger, this Owen Tucker, and for the first time in days she felt something other than terror. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, a flicker of hope. She nodded. As she gathered her bag and moved past him toward the ladder, the lantern light caught his right hand, and Hannah froze. On the back of his hand, running from his knuckle to his wrist, was a pale, jagged scar. A scar she had seen 1,000 times before. A scar she had traced with her own fingers on cool nights. It was identical to the one her husband Jacob had. The ranch house was simple, but Owen had a fire roaring in the hearth in minutes. The warmth felt good, but it didn't stop the chill that had taken root deep inside Hannah. The scar. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. "I'll heat up some stew," he said, his back to her as he moved around the small kitchen. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." She hadn't. The smell of the food made her stomach clench with a hunger so fierce it was painful. She ate quickly, silently, while Owen sat across the small table, nursing a cup of coffee. He didn't speak. He just watched her. His gaze was intense, unnerving. It felt like he was looking right through her, searching for something. "Thank you," she said finally, her spoon clattering against the empty bowl. He just nodded. "You want to tell me what really happened?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it was not a suggestion. The kindness she thought she'd seen in the barn was gone, replaced by something harder, something demanding. And suddenly, the story she'd been holding back, the truth she'd been desperate for someone to hear, came spilling out. She told him about the fire, about the lies Thomas Blackwell had started after Jacob refused to sell him the store, about the town turning on her, about her innocence. "I never betrayed him," she said, her voice breaking. "I loved my husband." Owen listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. When she was finished, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. "I believe you," he said. The words were what she'd been longing to hear, but the way he said them sent a fresh wave of fear through her. It wasn't reassurance. It was a statement of fact, like he already knew. "You can stay here," he continued, standing up. Work as my housekeeper. I'll pay you. It'll give you time to figure things out. It was a generous offer. Too generous. Why are you doing this? She asked again, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, and the firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making it impossible to read his eyes. Let's just say I have a vested interest in seeing the truth about that fire come out. He showed her to the main bedroom. Take this one. I'll be in the small room off the kitchen. She lay down on the clean sheets, but sleep was impossible. The house was quiet, but her mind was screaming. The scar, his strange intensity, his vested interest. This man wasn't just a kind stranger. He was something else. He was connected to this, somehow. To Jacob. To the fire. She wasn't safe here. She had run from a town full of enemies, and straight into the den of... What? She didn't know. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. She clutched the small bag to her chest, the blood-stained letter inside a cold weight against her skin. She had to get out. At first light, she would run. But morning brought a new kind of terror. She was in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to make coffee, when she heard the horses. Not one. Several. She peered through the window, and her heart stopped. It was Sheriff Mills from Whitrock, and with him were 2 deputies, and the man whose lies had destroyed her life, Thomas Blackwell. They weren't here for a friendly visit. Owen was already outside, standing on the porch, his stance wide, confrontational. He looked like a man expecting a fight. Hannah forced herself to move. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out into the cold morning air, her head held high. She would not let them see her fear. Mrs. Parker, Sheriff Mills said, his voice flat. He didn't tip his hat. We've been looking for you. She's not going anywhere, Owen said before Hannah could speak. His voice was low and dangerous. Has she committed a crime, Sheriff? Blackwell sneered from his horse. Besides running from her husband's debts, you mean? There are questions about that fire, Tucker. Very convenient she wasn't home when it started. Rage, hot and sharp, cut through Hannah's fear. I was delivering a package to Mrs. Henderson, and you know it. Sheriff Mills shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. There's talk, Mrs. Parker. The investigation is still open. Owen took a step forward, placing himself between Hannah and the men. Mrs. Parker is in my employ now. If you have a warrant, serve it. If you have charges, state them. Otherwise, you're on my land without invitation. The sheriff looked from Owen to Blackwell, his expression uncertain. Then he reached into his coat. But it wasn't a piece of paper he pulled out. It was a pair of handcuffs. Hannah Parker, the sheriff said, his voice now booming with authority. I have a sworn statement from a witness who saw you buying lamp oil, an unusual amount, the day before the fire. I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Jacob Parker. The world tilted. Hannah felt the ground rush up to meet her. Murder. They were calling her a murderer. Blackwell's smile was triumphant. But then something happened. Something fast. Owen moved. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He moved like a gunslinger. In one fluid motion, he stepped in front of Hannah, drew his revolver, and aimed it squarely at the sheriff's chest. You're not taking her, he said. The voice was his, but it was different. Colder, harder, empty of all warmth. The deputies fumbled for their own weapons, but Owen was faster. I wouldn't, he warned, his eyes like chips of ice. The sheriff's face was a mask of shock. Tucker, have you lost your mind? This is obstructing justice. This isn't justice, Owen snarled. This is a land grab, orchestrated by him. He jerked his head toward Blackwell. Blackwell laughed. He's protecting his new woman, Sheriff. It's almost romantic. Proves what we all knew. Owen didn't take his eyes off the sheriff, but his next words were for Blackwell. I know who you are, and I know what you did to my brother. Brother. The word hung in the air, a gunshot in the silent morning. Hannah stared at Owen's back. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The sheriff lowered his gun slightly, confusion warring with duty on his face. Your brother? Owen finally looked away from the lawman, turning his head just enough to pin Thomas Blackwell with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "My name isn't Owen Tucker," he said, his voice ringing with a truth that was more terrifying than any lie. "It's Owen Parker, and Jacob was my brother." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Hannah felt the breath leave her body. Owen Parker. Jacob's brother. But Jacob had told her he was an only child. He'd said his family was dead, lost to fever years ago back in Missouri. He had been so convincing, his story so full of sorrow. Another lie. Her whole marriage, it seemed, was built on lies. Sheriff Mills looked completely lost. "Parker, I don't understand. Why the different name?" "Because my brother was a coward," Owen Parker, spat, his gaze still locked on Blackwell. "He ran away from home at 17 after a falling out with our father. He wanted nothing to do with us. I've been searching for him for 10 years. I finally tracked him to this miserable town a month ago, hoping to reconcile." His voice cracked just for a second. "I arrived the day after the fire." Blackwell's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a wary, calculating look. "This changes nothing. Your brother took his own life because his wife was unfaithful." "No," Owen said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "My brother was many things. A liar, a coward. But he wasn't suicidal, and he wasn't stupid enough to trap himself in a fire. Someone else set that fire, Blackwell. Someone who wanted his store. Someone who wanted his land." He took a step toward Blackwell's horse. "You've been trying to buy Jacob's store for a year. He always refused. Suddenly there's a fire, and you're the first one whispering about suicide and affairs. And now you're here with a trumped-up murder charge to get his wife out of the way, so the bank will have no choice but to sell the property to you. It's all a little too convenient." The sheriff looked at Blackwell, a new suspicion dawning in his eyes. He'd been played. Blackwell had fed him the story about the lamp oil, pushed him to make the arrest. "That's a wild accusation, Parker," Blackwell blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Owen's gun was still steady. "Hannah, the letter," he said, not looking at her. "The letter you had in your bag." Hannah's hand flew to the carpet bag she'd dropped on the porch. How did he know about the letter? He'd never seen inside her bag. Shaking, she pulled it out. The bloodstain was a dark, ugly blotch. "My brother wrote that, didn't he?" Owen asked. "He sent it to you the day of the fire." Hannah could only nod, speechless. "It's his confession," Owen said, his eyes drilling into Blackwell. "Isn't it? He knew you were coming for him. He wrote it all down, everything you were doing, and gave it to his wife for safekeeping." It wasn't a confession. It was just a few cryptic lines about meeting at a place called the Old Sentinel and to trust no one. But in that moment, seeing the trap Owen was laying, Hannah understood. She looked at the sheriff, her voice finding its strength. "He's right. It's all in here. Jacob knew Mr. Blackwell was dangerous. He was afraid." The sheriff's face hardened. He turned his gaze on Blackwell. "Thomas, you have some explaining to do." Blackwell looked like a cornered rat. He saw the sheriff turning on him. He saw the deputies now looking at him with suspicion, and he saw the cold promise of death in Owen Parker's eyes. He made his move. He spurred his horse violently, shoving it straight toward Owen while simultaneously drawing a pistol he'd had hidden in his coat. It was a desperate, chaotic move. Owen fired, but the rearing horse threw off his aim. The bullet went wide. Blackwell's horse slammed into Owen, sending him stumbling back. Hannah screamed. Blackwell wasn't trying to escape. He was charging past them, straight for the barn. "He's not getting away," the sheriff yelled, drawing his own weapon. But Owen was already up, his face a mask of fury. "He's not running, you fool! He's going for the evidence!" The evidence? What was in the barn? Owen sprinted after him with the sheriff and his deputies close behind. Hannah was frozen for a second, her heart hammering against her ribs, before she ran after them. Inside the barn, it was chaos. Blackwell had thrown aside hay bales and was pulling at a loose floorboard near the back wall. "It's over, Blackwell!" the sheriff shouted from the doorway. Blackwell ignored him. He pried the board loose and reached into the dark space beneath. He pulled out a heavy leather satchel. He threw it open, and even in the dim light of the barn, the contents gleamed. Gold. Raw, unrefined gold nuggets. "What in God's name?" the sheriff whispered. Owen stood beside him, his pistol still aimed at Blackwell, but his face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror. "This was never about the store," Owen said, his voice hollow. Blackwell laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "Your brother was smarter than you gave him credit for, Parker, and dumber. He and I had a partnership. We were moving gold from some of the less official mines up in the mountains. Your brother's store was the perfect front. We were going to be rich." Hannah felt sick. Smuggling. Jacob was a criminal. "What happened?" Owen demanded. "He got greedy," Blackwell snarled, clutching the bag of gold. "He wanted to cut me out. He was planning to fake his death in the fire, make it look like a suicide, and disappear with my share of the gold. He was going to let his sweet little wife take the blame for it all." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Jacob was going to frame her, leave her to face the consequences while he ran with a fortune. The man she loved, the man she grieved, he had been willing to sacrifice her. The fire wasn't suicide. It was a failed escape plan. "But I found out about his little scheme," Blackwell continued, his eyes glittering with madness. "So I decided to change the plan. I made sure the fire was real. I made sure he couldn't get out." A terrible, chilling thought struck Hannah. "The letter," she whispered. Owen looked at her, his face grim. "He wasn't writing you a confession, Hannah. He was writing you instructions. The rendezvous point. Where to meet him after he escaped." It all clicked into place. The bloodstain. It wasn't Jacob's blood. Jacob had been alive when he wrote it. So whose blood was it? A new wave of horror washed over her as she remembered the blacksmith's son, the boy they'd accused her of having an affair with. He had disappeared the day of the fire. No one had seen him since. He'd come to the store that afternoon, looking nervous, saying he had something important to tell Jacob. Oh, God. Jacob had silenced him. "You're a monster," Owen said to Blackwell, his voice shaking with rage. "You murdered my brother." Blackwell just smiled. He got what he deserved, and now I'll be taking what's mine. But as he turned to make a run for the back door of the barn, another figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the older of the two deputies, a man named Evans. A quiet, unassuming man Hannah had known for years. Except he wasn't looking at Blackwell. He was looking at Sheriff Mills. And he was holding two pistols, one aimed at the sheriff, the other at Owen. "I'm afraid not, Thomas," Deputy Evans said, his voice calm and even. "The partnership is dissolved." Sheriff Mills stared at his deputy in disbelief. "Evans, what is this?" "Shut up, Mills," Evans said coldly. "You've been a useful idiot, but your usefulness has ended." He looked at Blackwell. "There were 3 partners in this venture, Thomas, not 2. You and Jacob were the front men. I handled the transport and made sure the law looked the other way. The sheriff, the real sheriff, was a corrupt partner in a smuggling ring. The whole town's law enforcement was a sham. You were going to cut me out, too, weren't you?" Evans said to Blackwell. "You and Jacob. Take all the gold for yourselves. Blackwell's face was pale. No, Evans, we wouldn't. Liar, Evans snapped. But it doesn't matter now. Jacob's dead. You're a confessed murderer. I'll be the hero who brings you in, along with this mysterious Owen Tucker who obstructed justice. I'll take the gold as evidence, of course. And poor Mrs. Parker. Well, I imagine in the confusion of the shootout, she might catch a stray bullet. A tragic end to a tragic story. Hannah's blood ran cold. He was going to kill them all. Right here, and write his own story over their graves. He was the true puppet master. He had been pulling all the strings from the very beginning. This quiet deputy, this man who tipped his hat to her on the street, was the real devil in Whitrock. Owen and the sheriff were both armed, but Evans had the drop on them. He was positioned perfectly, using a stack of barrels as cover. The other deputy was young, terrified, his hand hovering over his own gun, unsure of what to do. "Don't be a fool, son," Evans said to the young deputy without looking at him. "There's enough gold here for two." The young deputy's eyes darted from his boss, Evans, to Sheriff Mills. His face was slick with sweat. It was a standoff, tense, unbreakable. Then from the hayloft above them came a creak. Everyone looked up. A figure was standing there, silhouetted against the light from the loft window. A man. He was gaunt, his clothes were singed and tattered, and one side of his face was a mess of angry red burns. But Hannah knew him. She knew the way he stood. She knew the shape of his shoulders. Her heart stopped. It wasn't possible. It was a ghost, a nightmare. The figure raised a hand and spoke in a raw, rasping voice she thought she would never hear again. "Hello, wife." It was Jacob. The barn was utterly silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Jacob Parker, the man who had supposedly burned to death, was standing in the hayloft, alive. Owen was the first to speak, his voice a choked whisper. "Jacob?" Jacob's eyes, burning with a feverish intensity in his scarred face, found his brother. "Owen, I should have known you'd come sniffing around." There was no warmth in his voice, only resentment. He then looked down at Blackwell, who was staring up at him as if he'd seen a ghost. "You tried to kill me, Thomas. You locked the back door. You thought you could trap me in my own fire." "But I built that store," Jacob rasped, a hint of pride in his voice. "I know its secrets. There's a cellar under the floorboards in the back room, lined with stone. I waited there until the fire passed over. He'd been alive this whole time, hiding, waiting." Sheriff Mills finally found his voice. "Jacob Parker, you are under arrest for smuggling, conspiracy, and the murder of the blacksmith's son." Jacob laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Murder. That boy got what was coming to him. He was trying to blackmail me. He was going to tell Hannah everything." He looked at Hannah then, and the hatred in his eyes was so pure, so venomous, it made her flinch. "This is all your fault," he hissed. "You and your righteous snooping. You couldn't just be a good, obedient wife. You had to ask questions. You had to follow me. If you had just done as you were told, we'd all be rich, and that boy would still be alive." The man she had married, the man she had loved and mourned, was a complete stranger. A monster who had not only planned to abandon her, but who blamed her for his own evil. He had tried to have her killed in that fire. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The blood on the letter. He'd killed the blacksmith's son, then used his blood to seal the envelope, a final, cruel message she was never meant to understand. Suddenly, the standoff below exploded into motion. Deputy Evans, seeing his entire plan collapsing, made his move. He fired at Sheriff Mills. At the same time, the young, terrified deputy finally chose a side. He drew his weapon and fired at Evans. Shots echoed through the barn, a deafening roar. Hannah screamed and dropped to the floor. Owen shoved her behind a pile of sacks, shielding her with his own body. When the smoke cleared, Sheriff Mills was on the ground, clutching a bloody shoulder, but alive. The young deputy was also down, a look of surprise on his face, and Deputy Evans lay dead, a bullet from the young deputy's gun in his chest. But the chaos wasn't over. Blackwell, seeing his chance, grabbed the bag of gold and sprinted for the back door. He never made it. A single shot rang out from the loft. Blackwell crumpled to the ground, the bag of gold falling from his grasp. Jacob stood above them, a rifle in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. He had just saved their lives by killing his partner. But the look on his face wasn't one of a hero. It was one of cold, hard calculation. With Evans and Blackwell dead, there were fewer shares to split. He started to climb down the ladder, the rifle held ready. "Now," he said, his eyes sweeping over Owen, the wounded sheriff, and Hannah, "we can talk about how this is going to work." Owen slowly got to his feet, pushing Hannah further behind him. He still held his own pistol. The two brothers faced each other across the blood-soaked floor of the barn. "It's over, Jacob," Owen said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that went deeper than anger. "Over." Jacob laughed again, that horrible rasping sound. "It's just beginning, little brother. The gold is mine, all of it. You can have the woman. She's no use to me anymore." He looked at Hannah with utter contempt. "Or maybe I'll kill you both. Tie up all the loose ends." "You're not the man I remember," Owen said softly. "The man you remember was a boy. This world taught me to be a survivor. You should have stayed home, Owen." "No," Owen said, his voice hardening. "I'm glad I came. I'm glad I know what you really are." Jacob raised his rifle. "Then you'll die knowing." He was going to shoot. He was going to kill his own brother. Hannah couldn't let it happen. She saw a rusty pitchfork leaning against the wall nearby. Without thinking, she grabbed it. It was heavy, awkward. "Jacob, no!" she screamed. He glanced at her, distracted for just a fraction of a second. It was all Owen needed. He fired. The bullet hit Jacob square in the chest. He staggered back against the ladder, a look of complete surprise on his burned face. The rifle clattered to the floor. He looked down at the spreading stain on his shirt, then back up at his brother. He opened his mouth to say something, but only a gurgle of blood came out. Then his eyes rolled back and he slid down to the ground, lifeless. Silence returned to the barn. A heavy, final silence, broken only by the pained groans of the wounded sheriff. It was over, really over. Blackwell, Evans, Jacob, all dead. The gold, the lies, the betrayals, all of it had ended here, in this barn, in a storm of blood and violence. Hannah stood trembling, the heavy pitchfork still in her hands. She looked at Owen. He was staring at his brother's body, his face pale, his gun hand shaking. He had just killed his own brother to save her. He slowly looked up, his eyes finding hers. The intensity, the hardness was gone. All she saw now was a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. A man who had lost everything he had come here to find. "Hannah," he started, his voice rough. But she didn't want to hear it. Not now. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a tidal wave of grief and horror. The man she had once loved was a monster. The man who had saved her was a stranger, a killer, and the brother of that monster. She turned and ran. Out of the barn, out into the sunlight, which felt harsh and alien. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she collapsed in the tall grass. And finally, she wept. She wept for the man she thought she'd married. She wept for the life she thought she'd had. And she wept for the terrifying unknown future that now stretched before her. Weeks turned into a month. The town of Whitrock was in an uproar. The story of the shootout at the Caldwell Ranch, the corrupt deputy, and the smuggling ring was on the front page of every newspaper in Colorado. The wounded Sheriff Mills, once he was able to speak, told the whole truth. He made sure everyone knew that Hannah Parker was a victim, not a villain, that she had been betrayed by her husband and targeted by dangerous men. The town, fickle and ashamed, tried to make amends. Mr. Williams from the bank personally rode out to the ranch to tell Hannah that all of Jacob's debts were forgiven. People who had once crossed the street to avoid her now nodded their heads in sympathy. But it was too late. Whitrock was a graveyard to her now, full of ghosts. She stayed at the ranch. There was nowhere else to go. Owen had insisted. He moved into the barn, giving her the house, and they lived in a strange, silent limbo. He took care of the ranch work, and she tended to the house, and they barely spoke. The chasm between them felt too wide to cross. He was a Parker. He was a living reminder of the lies and the violence. Every time she looked at him, she saw Jacob. The gold was taken by the federal marshals as evidence. The case was officially closed. Owen was cleared of any wrongdoing, hailed as a hero who had helped expose the criminals. One cool evening, he found her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "The marshals are done," he said, standing a few feet away. "They've released Jacob's assets." She didn't say anything. "There's not much," he continued, "but with what our father left me, it's a considerable sum." He paused. "Half of it is yours." Hannah finally looked at him. "I don't want his money." "It's not his money. It's justice," Owen said quietly. "It's enough to go anywhere you want. Denver, San Francisco, back east, anywhere. A fresh start with no questions asked." He was offering her an escape, a way out, a way away from him. It was what she thought she wanted. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For me to leave?" He walked over to the porch railing, his back to her, and looked out at the vast expanse of land. His land. "What I want," he said, his voice heavy, "is for you to be safe and happy. I came here looking for my brother, to find some piece of the family I lost. Instead, I found this." He gestured vaguely at the barn, the house, the blood-soaked memories. "Everything I told you when I first found you in the loft was a lie," he said, turning to face her. "My name. Why I was here. I used you to get to Blackwell, to get to the truth." His honesty was brutal. It hurt. "But somewhere along the way," he continued, taking a hesitant step toward her, "the lies started to feel wrong. Because of you. Seeing your strength, your courage. One thing I said wasn't a lie, Hannah." He looked her straight in the eye. "I told you I believed you. And I did, from the first moment I saw you." They stood there in the fading light, the truth finally laid bare between them. He wasn't his brother. He was a man who had been tangled in his brother's darkness, just as she had. He had sought justice, and he had paid a terrible price for it. She thought about leaving. She thought about taking the money and running until she couldn't remember the name Parker. But then, she thought about that first night, about the stranger who had found her, broken and alone, and offered her a bed. The man who had stood between her and a corrupt sheriff. The man who had killed his own blood to protect her. This ranch wasn't a place of ghosts anymore. It was the only place in the world she had felt safe. And this man, he was the reason. "I don't want to go anywhere," she said, her voice soft but clear. "This place, it's the only home I have left." A flicker of something, hope, relief, crossed his face. "I'm not Jacob," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, Hannah." "I know," she said, and for the first time she truly did. "Your name is Owen Tucker. You're a rancher, and you offered me your bed." A small smile touched his lips. "Best offer I ever made." He closed the distance between them, and when he took her hand, it didn't feel like a betrayal of the past. It felt like the beginning of a future. A year later, the ranch was thriving. The first calves of the season dotted the green pastures. The name Parker was a half-forgotten nightmare, a story people in town told to spook their children. Hannah Tucker stood on the porch, a hand resting on her swollen belly. She watched her husband, Owen, mending a fence near the creek. He saw her watching and waved, his familiar, easy smile reaching her even from a distance. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. It was built on a foundation of tragedy and truth. Their love wasn't born from a gentle courtship, but forged in the fire of betrayal and violence. And it was stronger for it. The road that had led her, a desperate widow, to that hayloft had been paved with heartbreak, but it had brought her here, to this man, to this life. Home. Sometimes the worst day of your life is just the beginning of your story, and sometimes the only way to find out who you can truly trust is when everyone else has already betrayed you. What do you think? Is it better to trust a stranger who shows you kindness, or to never trust anyone at all? If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of darkness, justice, and the strange twists of fate, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's coming next.